Namaste, good evening. Hi, everyone. I came across something that I think is very timely in a few directions. It's a summary of Eric Hoffer's The True Believer. Now, The True Believer, it says it's very widely considered a classic text. And it's a social psychology that discusses the psychological causes of fanaticism. Well, you get fanaticism in whether it's the political things that are going on now, or whether it's some sort of a cultish type of activity. So you'll see that as I go through this and read this, how it fits both type of dynamics. Okay, so this was so good, I thought I would just read the whole thing. It's not that long, but I'll go ahead and put up the URL to it as well, so anybody else that would like to take time to read it may do so. Okay, it's the overview. It says the first lines of Hoffer's book clearly state its purpose. This book deals with some peculiarities common to all mass movements, be they religious movements, social revolutions, or nationalist movements. It does not maintain that all movements are identical, but that they share certain essential characteristics which give them a family likeness. All mass movements generate in their adherents a readiness to die and a proclivity for united action. All of them, irrespective of the doctrine they preach and the program they project, breed fanaticism, enthusiasm, fervent hope, hatred, and intolerance. All of them are capable of releasing a powerful flow of activity in certain departments of life. All of them demand blind faith and single-hearted allegiance. Now, again, we see this happening in, with these gurus and these cults, or whether it's a Christian cult, it doesn't matter what type of a cultish type of activity, they demand absolutely blind faith. Okay, and then rises this intolerance and this hatred towards others, which they have no problem projecting out. Okay, there is something with this that I see that's happening with this divisionary thing now. You see it with the, Fox News claims everything is fake. And I mean, they're going off on these horrible, just made up dramas, conspiracy theories. You get that Judge Jean Pirro that says, that, the FBI, Mueller should be taken out in handcuffs. I mean, it's horrible. They stir up hatred. You see the backing of them has a lot of the white supremacy type things there. It's absolutely atrocious. And this is something that I've seen that's really disconcerting when you have them starting to bring up this nationalism. When I see a lot of flags coming out and this nationalism, it breeds again this divisionary hate of us against them. And it can be a very dangerous thing that's starting to arise, so something that needs to be watched carefully. Okay. The assumption that mass movements have many traits in common does not imply that all movements are equally beneficent or poisonous. The book passes no judgments and expresses no preferences. It merely tries to explain. Okay, part 1, the appeal of mass movements. Hoffer says that mass movements begin when discontented, powerless people lose faith in existing institutions and demand change. Starting out from the fact that the frustrated predominate among the early adherents of all mass movements, it is assumed, 1, that frustration of itself without any proselytizing prompting from the outside can generate most of the peculiar characteristics of the true believer. 2, that an effective technique of conversion consists basically in the inculcation and fixation of proclivities and responses indigenous to the frustrated mind. Okay. Feeling hopeless, such as people participate in movements that allow them to become part of a larger collective, a mass movement. This appeals not to those intent on bolstering and advancing a cherished self, but to those who crave to be rid of an unwanted self because it can satisfy the passion for self-renunciation. Put another way, Hoffer says, faith in a holy cause is to a considerable extent a substitute for the loss of faith in ourselves. Leaders inspire these movements, but the seeds of mass movements must already exist for the leaders to be successful. And while mass movements typically blend nationalist, political, and religious ideas, they all compete for angry and or marginalized people. Part 2, the potential converts. The destitute are not usually converts to mass movements. They are too busy trying to survive to become engaged. But what Hoffer calls the new poor, those who previously had wealth or status, but who believe they now have lost it, are potential converts. Such people are resentful and blame others for their problems. Mass movements also attract the partially assimilated, those who feel alienated from mainstream culture. Others include misfits, outcasts, adolescents, and sinners, as well as the ambitious, selfish, impotent, and bored. What all converts all share is the feeling that their lives are meaningless and worthless. A rising mass movement attracts and holds following not by its doctrine and promises, but by the refuge it offers from the anxieties, barrenness, and meaninglessness of an individual existence. It cures the poignantly frustrated, not by conferring on them an absolute truth, or remedying the difficulties and abuses which made their lives miserable, but by freeing them from their ineffective selves, and it does this by enfolding and absorbing them into a closely knit and exultant corporate whole. Hoffer emphasizes that creative people, those who experience creative flow, aren't usually attracted to mass movements. Creativity provides inner joy, which both acts as an antidote to the frustrations with external hardships. Creativity also relieves boredom, one of the main causes of mass movements. There is perhaps no more reliable indicator of a society's ripeness for a mass movement than the prevalence of unrelieved boredom. In almost all the descriptions of the periods preceding the rise of mass movements, there is reference to vast ennui, and their earliest stages, mass movements are more likely to find sympathizers and support among the bored than among the exploited and oppressed. To a deliberate fomenter of mass upheavals, the report that people are bored still should be at least as encouraging as that they are suffering from intolerable economic or political abuses. Part 3, United Action and Self-Sacrifice. Mass movements demand of their followers a total surrender of a distinct self. Thus, a follower identifies as a member of a certain tribe or family. Furthermore, mass movements denigrate and loathe the present. By regarding the modern world as worthless, the movement inspires a battle against it. What surprises one when listening to the frustrated as to decry the present in all its works is the enormous joy they derive from doing so. Such delight cannot come from the mere venting of a grievance. There must be something more, and there is. By expatiating upon the incurable baseness and vileness of the times, the frustrated soften their feeling of failure and isolation. Mass movements also promote the use of doctrines that elevate faith over reason and serve as fact-proof screens between the faithful and the realities of the world. The effectiveness of a doctrine does not come from its meaning, but from its certitude. So this is important, this part. Presented as the embodiment of the one and only truth, if a doctrine is not intelligible, it has to be vague. And if it's neither unintelligible nor vague, it has to be unverifiable. One has to get to heaven or the distant future to determine the truth of an effective doctrine. Simple words are made pregnant with meaning and made to look like symbols in a secret message. There is thus an illiterate air about the most literate true believer. So believers ignore truths that contradict their fervent beliefs. Okay, let me say that again. Believers ignore truths that contradict their fervent beliefs. You can show them in absolute black and white and they'll still be in denial about it. Okay? But this hides the fact that the fanatic is perpetually incomplete and insecure. He cannot generate self-assurance out of his individual sources, but finds it only by clinging passionately to whatever support he happens to embrace. The passionate attachment is the essence of his blind devotion and religiosity, and he sees it in the sources of all virtue and strength. He sacrifices his life to prove his worth. The fanatic cannot be weaned away from his cause by an appeal to reason or his moral sense. He fears compromise and cannot be persuaded to qualify the certitude and righteousness of his holy cause. Thus, the doctrines of the mass movement must not be questioned. They are regarded with certitude, and they are spread through persuasion, coercion, proselytation. Persuasion works best on those already sympathetic to the doctrines, but it must be vague enough to allow the frustrated to hear the echo of their own musings in it. Let me say that again. It must be vague enough to allow the frustrated to hear the echo of their own musings in it. Impassioned double talk. Let me say it again. Impassioned double talk. Hofer quotes Nazi propagandist Joseph Goebbels, "A sharp sword must always stand behind propaganda if it's to be really effective. The urge to proselytize comes not from a deeply held belief in the truth of the doctrine, but from an urge of the fanatic to strengthen his own faith by converting others. Moreover, mass movements need an object of hate, which unifies believers, and the ideal devil is a foreigner. Mass movements need a devil, but in reality, the hatred of a true believer is actually a disguised self-loathing, and the fanatic is perpetually incomplete and insecure. And through their fanatical action and personal sacrifice, the fanatic tries to give their life meaning." This is part 4, the beginning and end. Hofer states that 3 personality types typically lead mass movements: men of words, fanatics, and practical men of action. In the beginning, men of words lead the movements. Regarding the radical positions of the Republicans and Trumpism in the USA, think of the late William F. Buckley. Men of words try to discredit the prevailing creeds and creates a hunger for faith, which is then fed by doctrines and slogans of the new faith, and slowly followers emerge. Then fanatics take over. In the U.S., think of the Koch brothers, Murdoch, Limbaugh, O'Reilly, Hannity, etc. Fanatics don't find solace in literature, philosophy, or art. Instead, they are characterized by viciousness, the urge to destroy, and the perpetual struggle for power. But after mass movements transforms the social order, the insecurity of their followers is not ameliorated. In this point, the practical men of action take over and try to lead the order. Now the leaders try to control their former followers. In the end, mass movements that succeed often bring about social order worse than the previous one. This was one of Will Durant's findings in the Lessons of History. As Hoffer puts it near the end of his work, all mass movements, irrespective of the doctrine they preach and the program they project, breed fanaticism, enthusiasm, fervent hope, hatred, and intolerance. So again, I mean, you can see this across the board. You can see it in Trumpism, okay? The fanatics, the things that happens, that hatred. You can see it in, yes, some of the Nietzscheananda followers. If you've ever crossed any of them, you will find they have put the nastiest, foulest things they can put out. That hatred, that anger, that nasty, it comes to the front. I don't care how much makeup they put on. You can see immediately that if something crosses one of their stories and that you confront it with reality, they become very vicious, can become very, very vicious. Okay, so I thought this was a good one to put up today. Again, like I said, it crosses both for whether it's a cult type thing or like what's happening now with the far right. It's the same thing. It's that cult type of thing. They're following Trump. They'll believe the lies. They believe the spin. They believe these, absolute erroneous, crazy conspiracy theories that they put out just to get people riled up. Like I said, one of the greatest bondings is people that are angry. And I've said this before in my talks. People are angry. They want to change. So they started following Trump. Unfortunately, it's mixed up with a lot of the white supremacist dogma and nonsense too. And they have absolutely no bad feelings about lying. They'll lie like Trump. 100% lies here, lies there, doesn't matter. Okay? So I thought this was a good one to put out there. I will put the URL to this piece out there, so if anybody wants to check it for accuracy, you're more than welcome to do so. As in any of my pieces, if I am quoting from somewhere, I will put the URL, so you can go ahead and check that for yourselves as to what it is saying and what it's not. Okay, thank you. Have a great evening. Namaste. Bye, everyone.